where you make the fentanyl? And then some of them said yes. And so in early 2018, I bought a plane ticket and I went to China. And my wife was very concerned about this. You know, I was worried not just about these drug companies, but about the Chinese government, because I was there on a visa, a tourist visa, not on a journalist visa. Because everyone told me, you don't want to get a journalist visa because the government will give you a babysitter. They will follow you around, they will tell you where to go. And so I got a tourist visa, and even though that was breaking the law, when I arrived, I was very paranoid. You know, in China, there's cameras on every block, and they're like, you know, facial recognition. When I got to my hotel, the phone was ringing. I took it off the hook. I locked my door. But when it came to visiting these chemical companies, it was very, very easy. They had their address right on their webpage. So I just showed up at the company and I said, hello, I'm Johnny. I was met at this one company. It's called Yuan Cheng. And this company was based in Wuhan. So this was before coronavirus. This was in 2018. And I determined that this company was making more fentanyl precursors than any other company in the world. So fentanyl precursors are the most important ingredients to make fentanyl. So this company made all these fentanyl precursors and shipped them across the ocean to the Mexican cartels. They finish the fentanyl and then they send it across the border to be sold in the United States. So this company in Wuhan called Yuan Cheng, I came to the front door and I was met by the salespeople and they said, sure, come on in. And they gave me a tour of the building. And I was very shocked to see the sales floor. There was hundreds and hundreds of young salespeople sitting at cubicles in front of desktop computers. They were on social media, on Skype. They were selling these fentanyl ingredients just like it was any other chemical. You know, this was a very professional company that all of the salespeople were chosen because they were good at English, and they were, you know, selling, as far as I could tell, millions of dollars worth of chemicals, but their most profitable ones were the fentanyl ingredients, and they were also selling anabolic steroids. Does everybody know what steroids are? You know, muscle pills, and so again, these chemicals are in the gray market. The fentanyl ingredients, steroids, they're legal in China, but illegal in the West. And so they gave me the tour of the facility, and then they even introduced me to the CEO of the company, and he was sitting right there with the other salespeople. And he didn't speak much English. I don't speak any Chinese. I don't speak Chinese, I don't speak Spanish. I don't speak much of anything. But it wasn't until later that I got home that I called the CEO with the translator, and I came clean. I told him, I said, you know, I'm a journalist. I want to know, you know, how can you sleep at night knowing that you're selling all of these chemicals that is causing the biggest drug crisis in American history. 100,000 Americans died in 2021, and almost all, the majority was from fentanyl. And I said, how can how can your conscience, you live with your conscience with this? And what he said was, well, we don't know what people use these chemicals for. He said, there are lots of uses for these chemicals, not just for fentanyl. And plus, it's legal in China. So, we're just following the law. What I found was that this is not true, that these chemicals can be used for other things. I talked to chemists and they said, no, these chemicals are only used for fentanyl. And so I did that, I came back home, I published my book, and I thought that something was going to happen to this company, and finally it did. There was the U.S. Department of Justice indicted the CEO, and they put a $5 million reward for information leading to his capture. The thing is, though, he will probably never be captured because China does not have an extradition treaty. Do you know what I mean? Like, they don't have to send him to the U.S., and their cooperation with the U.S. is getting less and less. And part of that, I think, is because of Donald Trump. During coronavirus, during COVID, he said, this is all China's fault. This is, so the relations got very bad. China said, we're not going to help. So the only way they might capture this guy is if he got on a plane and came to the U.S., they could arrest him when he got off the plane, or if he went to another country that was allies with the U.S. But now he knows, so that's not going to happen. So the main thing I learned from all this reporting is the same thing that's reflected in the subtitle of the book. Porque siempre perderemos la guerra contra las drogas sintéticas. So we will never win the war against synthetic drugs. Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin. So that means if you have 50 pounds of heroin, 50 kilos of heroin, you only need 1 kilo of fentanyl to have the same impact. So when it comes to smuggling, it's so much easier to smuggle fentanyl. So trying to stop it is almost impossible. I spoke with Customs and Border Patrol agent at San Isidro at the border, and he said that they intercept less than 1% of the drugs coming across the border from Mexico to the U.S. And yet we're spending, billions of dollars every year to try to stop this international drug trade. We were just speaking about the history of the DEA in Mexico, this other book about this subject. The DEA has spent so many decades, they were responsible for the death of Pablo Escobar, and yet there's more cocaine than ever coming from Colombia. El Chapo was captured, and it has done almost nothing to stop the spread of these drugs. And my conclusion is that we have to raise awareness and education, and we can only control what happens here. We have to tell people about fentanyl. Like, I just saw a news article that said 8th graders in Arizona, only 50% of them have even heard of fentanyl. Kids don't realize that Fentanyl can be in any pill or any powder from the black market. So cocaine, heroin, meth, and pills. These pills look exactly like a Xanax, exactly like a Percocet. They're called M30s. They have the blues. And now the cartels are making these rainbow fentanyl pills. They're all colors of the rainbow. People say they're like Skittles. Does everyone know? Do they have Skittles here? Yeah. So these fentanyl pills look just like Skittles, and people, some people don't realize they've taken fentanyl at all when they die. They thought they were taking a real pill, and because they're pressed to look exactly the same. And so that's the first thing we need to do is a widespread education campaign. And I understand that the fentanyl problem is starting to come to Mexico too. We need to also increase the harm reduction efforts, like I mentioned before. And so, we're very lucky when it comes to the opioid crisis. We have a miracle overdose reversal drug. Does anybody know what this is called? It's called Narcan. It's a spray, and the name of the drug is naloxone. But the spray is called Narcan. Overdose from any opioid, from heroin, fentanyl, opioid pills, Percocet, OxyContin. They could be about to die, but if you give them a spray of Narcan in each nostril, it will revive them. They'll come back to life. And we're very lucky to have this drug, but it's not in the hands of people who need it. Everywhere there's an opioid problem, people need to have Narcan available. We also have some great treatment drugs, and a program that's called medication-assisted treatment. So there's 3 primary drugs: methadone. Do we have a lot of methadone clinics in Mexico City? Yeah. Suboxone, and then there's one called naltrexone, which is also an opioid blocker. And so we have these great treatment drugs, but again, it's just a matter of getting them to the people who need them. And so, when it comes to battling the cartels, battling the Chinese drug manufacturers, it seems like to me this is a lot of money, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of violence, but really we need to be focusing on the users themselves and keeping them safe. So that was the message I came away with. So, do we want to turn it over? Do you guys have questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. I think it's an amazing job as a journalist, and good to have created that impact for authorities in the U.S., but also raising awareness of potential consumers, even when they probably not knowing what they are taking, and efforts to spread the message about this deadly effects of this fentanyl drug. Of course, the question of combating the illicit traffic of drugs is so complicated. It's not only China or Mexico or New Zealand or other countries. It's a complete worldwide networks that operates also in the United States. Otherwise, it would never came to the hands of the final consumers. And in particular, our colleague Isaac Morales Tenorio, who has been an active diplomat working together with the different countries in the UN context, can share us a little bit of his experience trying to create these legal frameworks, cooperation frameworks among countries and governments, particularly against this type of drugs in order to prevent all the effects that you just mentioned, and of course the trafficking, bringing to justice the persons involved. It's quite complicated. We've been for many years working in Austria, in the UN premises, but also in the bilateral dialogue with the US. So, Zach, thank you very much for being here, and we are glad to passing you the floor to listen to you in connection with what Ben and your own thoughts about this cancer in our society. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro, por la invitación. Celebro que se dé en este contexto de la Feria del Libro de las Relaciones Internacionales, que se ha vuelto ya un referente, creo, para toda la comunidad interesada en los temas de relaciones internacionales y política exterior. Acompaño el luto que expresaste al principio por la pérdida de Silvia Serrano. Estamos con ustedes desde la Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores. Well, I have to express that I am really glad to interact face-to-face with Ben right now. With regards of their book, Fentanyl Inc., or La fiesta se acabó, porque siempre perderemos la guerra contra las drogas sintéticas. Y creo, por cierto, que el subtítulo es bastante adecuado en español para reflejar el contenido del libro. What a topic, the fentanyl crisis. Such a multidimensional, complex, transnational phenomenon, and by itself represents a real challenge, I feel, to decide the way to address it. So my very initial comment to your book is the assertiveness, Ben, of its content, despite the complexity related to the topic itself. You really help us to go beyond this, I will say, Netflixation of the reality. You really help us to do this. The way that Ben decided to follow, then to present to us a story and at the same time robust analysis brings, I will say, a marvelous narrative. We can qualify this narrative like in between the human lives, I mean the more humane approach, and the more strategic concerns, policies, and political economy in general. Let me also recognize the vivid writing of this text, which I absolutely recommend to you in English or Spanish. By the way, it's great having now this text in Spanish. We found from the very beginning this journalist writing style, linked of course to the previous works of Ben, but here clearly enriched by the sensation of the experiences. You mentioned your own experiences, your friend, but also those experiences related to the whole investigation you carried, the interviews, and experiences from the closest bubbles where we live, all of us. From small towns in China and big cities in the US, small towns or the border in Mexico, for instance. Going now through the substance of the text, which for me, as mentioned by Alejandro, I am passionate to these topics because also our work trying to get a more comprehensive international drug policy from the international and multilateral discussions. So on the substance, it is key, the affirmation I found in the text, reflecting that this topic goes beyond drugs. It means more political clash between great power politics, indeed, US and China, and some others. And just let me read a quotation coming from the book, which I feel it is key to understand what the text offers to all of us. I will read it in Spanish, if you allow me. Arreglar el problema resulta extremadamente complicado. No obstante, porque esta es una historia que va más allá de las drogas. Es un tema político sobre el choque de las dos mayores superpotencias. Es una historia económica sobre el engaño de gigantescas compañías farmacéuticas. Es una historia sobre los estudios superiores y cómo la ciencia universitaria puede salir terriblemente mal. Es una historia tecnológica sobre increíbles innovaciones que están teniendo lugar en tiempo real, una historia sobre genios del marketing. Es una historia psicológica y filosófica sobre el cuerpo humano en conflicto con la mente humana. I sincerely feel that this quotation reflects perfectly what you will find in this text. And from my point of view, it is great the way Ben presented to us how this idea of drugs epidemics it is not a new idea. I mean, we have suffered, the whole world, and particularly the US, in many different situations, different drug crises, different drug epidemics. He just mentioned the opium epidemics centuries ago, the crack, more recent, the methamphetamines, the heroin. I mean, this long history about epidemics. But the issue right now with the current crisis with fentanyl, it is the potentialized debt that brings to this situation. Ben mentioned after investigating how powerful it is the fentanyl in comparison to those other drugs, hard drugs even, but not with this potentialized debt. And we can just imagine how with just 2 milligrams, you will kill. It is also great to read through the text all regarding the new situations, particularly this idea of not astronauts but psychonauts, right? Or the gamer culture, how between the gamer culture we can find some elements linked to the current market of these new psychoactive drugs. And in the end, we are talking about also youth. It is important to focus on how to deal with this more social comprehensive approach. We found all these comments with too much available information on, as I mentioned before, policies, economy, and the way that things are happening in a more strategic level. Ben also helped us to go beyond this, I will qualify it as conservative or traditional idea of seeing the drug problems just as a demand reduction and supply reduction problem. It is not anymore only about producers and consumers. We are facing very complex illicit market linked not only to drug but also to corporate responsibility. Here is key to tell the story about these big pharmaceutical companies creating the need and then having no responsibility with drugs. In this element, it was very important to me when we see what the government of Mexico right now, and Alejandro just mentioned it at the beginning, is trying to do with regards to arms trafficking. We do need right now focusing on corporate responsibility, on bringing them to more accountability processes, to get to responsibility because they have also helped to create the need, exactly as they did with the pharmaceutics, with the current fentanyl crisis. It's also very interesting, Ben, the way that you present these new developments, technological developments, and the dark web, the famous dark web efforts then to control, but at the same time not to limit the freedom. So it's this tension always right there, which is sincerely very interesting. And also mail. I mean the traditional mail. Before you need to go to buy some drugs with those dealers in very dark cities, etc. Now you receive your drug in your door because of the mail. And many people living and getting profits from it, not because they are dealers, not because they are drug traffickers, because they work for the mail, they work for these companies, etc., etc. It is key also the way that Ben presents some experiences, recent experiences, for instance, the New Zealand approach, which is very, very different, very interesting, and the way that they decide not to prohibit, but actually to intervene, etc. And all this related to this idea of a new approach. And the new approach concentrated on the harm reduction perspective, on the harm reduction intervention, and following all these elements regarding harm reduction. And just let me here share from my experience representing Mexico also in this process of trying to build a new international drug policy in 2016 with all these very intense negotiations. We tried to put on the table, Mexico and many other countries, we tried to put on the table the idea of preventing social harm. Considering social harm not only as a traditional harm reduction intervention, which is more related to the substitution of the drug or the mold health approach, but also those elements linked to violence, linked to many other issues that the market, not the user, not the final user, not the producer creates, but the market. Unfortunately, it was not possible, but sincerely helped us then to approach to a more comprehensive view, more humane, I would say, and trying to get a more justice point of view, not crime, but justice. And finally, just a couple of elements. I will add. I mean, I sincerely, when you read the whole book, then you get more questions. You don't get necessarily the answer, but I feel that is the goal exactly, to have more questions, then to try to figure how we can contribute to get this new approach in place or to push for. And I will add then to this how we can also manage these trends and activities and mechanisms which works getting profits from the limits of the licit and the illicit. Ben presented to us very clear how in China, for instance, some substances are licit and the production of them and the sales of them are licit, while in the West or in Mexico, they are illicit. We can say, for instance, the same regarding marijuana. Right now, in Mexico, still, we are not in the regulation of the market, nor in legalization. So right now, it is illegal, but just crossing the border in California, in many other states in America, it is legal. So how to deal with these licit-illicit limits when addressing all these very complex situations? And finally, also I will add the need also to think more about the inequalities that this illicit and complex market produces. When, for instance, having a crisis of overdose in America in the size that it has been presented to us, at the same time we have in Mexico and in Latin America many and thousands of people dying with pain because not receiving the correct prescription of morphine, just for mentioning an example. So this need of also focusing more on the inequalities created by this very complex market, it is also that I will invite, after reading this very complex, robust, and important book due to reflect also. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Zach, for your remarks and your questions, because your remarks indeed pose some questions for what is the future of this crisis. And I'll pass the floor to Ben, because according to your findings, what is next in this global problem of the fentanyl? Because as you underscored, people probably don't even know that they are taking fentanyl when they consume a pill, and they die for the effects. So with dealing with other drugs, the solution is legalization, but in this case it's not possible because it's deadly, the effect of the drug, and it's still too complicated to work together as countries, given the different incentives for some sectors of the society, for governments, for the different capacities, different budgets to deal with this issue. And we will continue discussing this and that, and you are the consumer, you are the producer, you are the trafficker, but what do you recommend in terms of dealing with this deadly drug that is the fentanyl? I know you mentioned the raising awareness for schools, middle schools, high schools, but what else we can do as a society from different perspectives?
Well, the good news is that fentanyl is not yet a big problem in most of the world, including in Mexico. You know, it's not a big problem here. Really, the only places where fentanyl is a big problem is the United States and Canada. And that's because of the overprescription of the pills, like I said, OxyContin from Purdue Pharma. The bad news is that fentanyl is coming. It's coming to Mexico, it's coming to the rest of the world. There's almost no way around it. The profit incentive is so strong. So when it comes to heroin versus fentanyl, you know, they're both opioids, they both relieve the same cravings. Most users would prefer heroin, okay? Heroin lasts longer. It's like 8 hours. People say it's more kind of like, you know, inspiring. But fentanyl is very short. It's just 2 or 3 hours. You need to get more and more. If you're an addicted user, a lot of times you have to resort to crime, prostitution, to pay for these drugs. So when you have this problem, the financial incentive for drug dealers to make everything fentanyl, the part of that, it's not just financial, it's that you can make fentanyl in a lab, right? With heroin, you need a whole field of poppies, you know, like in the mountains, you know, Sinaloa province and other places where they grow poppies. But law enforcement can see these poppies. You know, it takes months and months to grow them, a lot of money, resources. But if you can make fentanyl right in the lab, secret, small, you know, you don't need to wait for rain. It's much easier. Again, that's putting the incentive on fentanyl. So what I think you could do in a place like Mexico is assume that fentanyl is coming. So what can we do to stop it? What have other countries done to stop it? So a lot of people look to the country of Switzerland. So Switzerland has no problem with fentanyl at all. So what have they done to be successful? They have what's called as a heroin maintenance program. So this is a very radical idea. Basically, they give free heroin that's made by the government, free government heroin to addicted heroin users. So not just anyone can get this free heroin. You have to have been addicted for more than 2 years. You have to have tried other ways to beat the habit. You have to try recovery. But if you pass these requirements, the government gives people, these addicted users, free heroin. And so what does this do? Well, the first thing it does is it puts the drug dealers out of business, right? If they can't sell to these users, they start to disappear. The second thing is these users don't have to steal, do prostitution. They have their drug for free. And when they tried this in Switzerland, some very strange things, unexpected things happened. First of all, a lot of the users eventually just stop using. You know, they get older, and all of a sudden one day they say, I don't want to do this anymore. And so they just stop. And these are unexpected findings. And the people who I've talked to the most, the people who I trust the most, say that if we have a program like they have in Switzerland, that's going to help stop the fentanyl epidemic. Because the users are not going to be dying so much, the drug dealers will not have so much profit incentive, it's going to make the streets safer, you're going to have less syringes, needles in the parks, all around, because people will come inside to these clinics and use legally. So I'm not saying this is a perfect solution, but it would start to be a step in the right direction.
Lesson to learn from Switzerland. I wonder if the audience would like to pose a question. You could do it either in English or Spanish.
Yes, okay.
Adelante.
¿Me acerco? Bueno. Thanks. Good morning. Teresa Salazar of Periodismo Independiente. In the state of the United States, there are a problem with the people zombie. What kind of therapeutic psychology you are implement in your people? Yes?
No entiendo.
No,
Many people in the US
hay
are
un problema en Estados Unidos de la gente zombie. ¿Qué tipo de terapias psicológicas han implementado en su gente para evitar este problema?
She's asking about the people on the streets in the US that are sort of zombies, and she's asking what are the medical treatments for them and psychological treatments for them, if you know anything about it.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. Thank you for the question. I think a big misconception about opioid addiction is that, you take some heroin, you take some fentanyl, and then you're addicted for life. You get the chemical hooks of the drug stuck in you. So it's not just about the drug, it's not just about the chemical, it's about the lives of the users. These people who get addicted very often have a lot of trauma in their past. They have PTSD. Do people understand what I'm saying? They're living in poverty. They don't have a good job. They don't have a place to live. So every treatment, like you were mentioning, there has to be a psychological component too. It has to be counseling. So ideally, people are getting involved with programs that have, they're called holistic. So it's not just about giving someone methadone. It's about giving someone job placement. It's about helping people find a place to live. It's about giving them counseling for the problems in their past. And what you find is that if people are able to get their lives together, it's much easier to quit these bad drugs.
So.
Gracias.
Thanks.
¿Alguien más que quisiera hacer preguntas? Bien, aquí.
Hi, my name is Paula. My first question is, would you consider recommendable for the Mexican government to implement like awareness campaigns in places like schools, so that the younger population can be aware of what fentanyl is, what it can do, and not backfire?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. I would 100% recommend that, yes. And it's for younger kids than you realize, too. It's not just high school kids, but junior high kids. The problem is that with the pills, these young kids, they say, well, this is a pill like from a doctor. This is a pill like from a pharmacy. This is medicine. How can this hurt me? These kind of education campaigns are really essential. A lot of parents like my age, they say, well, when I was young, I could take a pill at a party. I could take a line at a party. Maybe I'll have a hangover the next day, but it's not going to be so bad. Everything is different now. And the kids and the parents need to have these education campaigns.
Yeah, there is a story here in Mexico that some people are bringing candies to primary schools and middle schools, and the students are taking under understanding that there are candies for them, but the effects and the creation of the addiction is what is more worrisome. Eric?
Hi, my name is Eric. I have a question about the Narcan that you mentioned. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Because I don't, is that legal? Or if not, it should be legal.
Yeah, it's legal. I assume it's legal here too. The question is like, can you get it without a prescription? In the US now, you can get it without a prescription. And that's great, but we also think it should be free to people who need it. And in some areas, they're starting to make it free. And here, they're going to have the same obstacles, I think.
Yeah, to spread the access for everyone, I mean, in the sense of this harmful reduction, so they can have access to that in case they are like overdosed or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
very important, yeah.
More questions? Great.
Hi, my name is Paulina. You said that in the border they only intercept 1% of fentanyl. Why is this? Is it harder to perceive, or why can they only stop 1% of the fentanyl that goes to the US?
Well, first of all, yeah, that's a good question. It's a total guess, right? It's impossible to know how much they're not getting. But this border agent, he estimates it's less than 1%. Because, like I said, if you have a suitcase, right, you can have 1 million doses of fentanyl in there. And so it could be in a car. The Border Protection Agency was telling me people bring them on surfboards. They like surf around the wall. There's underground tunnels. There's a million ways to do it. Drones. They have drones that go across the border. There's no way to secure the border. You know what I mean? It's impossible. And meanwhile, stuff comes directly from China. Stuff comes from Canada. There's the drug, and fentanyl is so strong, but there's another kind of fentanyl called carfentanil, which is an elephant tranquilizer, and it's 100 times stronger than fentanyl. So like these things keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We're never going to stop it, and that's an important message.
Rafael, y luego Isaac hará otro comentario.
Hello. Hello, my name is Marco, and I have a question, but also a commentary I would like to share with us, with you, principal. Well, I don't think drugs were such a problem in the past. As the way we develop our social system, it was becoming a problem. We're okay with that, no? Probably it wouldn't be if we weren't too persinados. It's a word we have in Mexico. Persinados is like scared of. Okay? With the topic, and just take the reality who has always been, as you say, I forgot your name, sorry. And give more information to all the people. Sensibility, the doctors and nurses, population in general about overdoses. You know, we are overdose sometimes, and how to help. I think we act in the actual way to co-live with this. No more criminalization about, but more information to the masses. I don't know if it's the correct word, but I think the information is the only way we can survive this war. Also, the question is, do you think there's a correlation between the poor zones, as Wuhan in this case, and the existence of drugs lab? It's all.
Existence of what?
Drugs, laboratory.
Labs, the drug labs.
Drugs, labs. Drugs.
It's all. Thank you.
I didn't understand the last part. A correlation between the existence of the labs and what?
Okay, the correlation between the poor zones, you know, they don't have money and education and these things.
Developed areas in different parts of the labs.
I still don't understand. Sorry.
I think like in poorer societies, they're more or less likely
Yeah.
in the lab.
Oh, okay.
It's like the economic resource.
Well, I think the main reason it's in China is because, you know, people can make fentanyl anywhere. They make fentanyl in Mexico, they make fentanyl in the United States. Why does everyone buy it from China? Well, because China makes everything so cheap. You know, why do you buy everything from China? You know, because they have a chemical industry in particular there with lots of trained chemists. They have the biggest pharmaceutical and chemical industry in the whole world in China. Most of it is legitimate, most of it is legal, but then this small portion is dedicated to these illicit drugs. Now in Mexico, how is the problem developed in Mexico? And I'm sure that poverty has a big element to that. You know, why have the cartels found these strongholds? These are in areas where there hasn't been a lot of support, where there's historic poverty, and I'm sure that these things are connected, like you said.
Thank you. Zach, you wanted to
Thank you. Just to
Following
contribute,
comments.
after hearing all these relevant questions and comments, just a couple of elements. Regarding awareness campaigns, prevention campaigns, campañas de prevención, campañas de generar conciencia. Right now, it is important to think on them in a more comprehensive manner. Just to say no, it is not enough. Right now, the traditional way of understanding di no a las drogas, that is not enough. We do need to educate on what the drugs produces. We don't need to end with the stigma about the drugs, because stigma alrededor de las drogas, se pueden desarrollar más programas de intervención y de reducción de daños. We can then go to get more experiences and innovation, like the suites I'm going to mention, or for instance, these new test programs where in different European countries, where in these music festival, techno music festivals, I mean, the authorities know that the young people will get high, will get something. So it is better than to test what exactly they are going to have to get high, them to avoid debts. So, I mean, they'll get high. Yes, the answer is yes, they get high. But no debts were right there because then the authorities could and can identify fentanyl, carfentanil, and these many others. Because right now it's not only two substances. Last Commission on Narcotics Drugs, I mean the UN body dedicated to control substances, review at least 35 new psychoactive substances. I mean, precursors of the precursors. I mean, precursors needed, chemical precursors, needed to produce fentanyl. So right now we are facing a race that we cannot win if we do not go to this more education and ending the stigma approach regarding the drugs.
Thank you. I have a question myself to Ben. You mentioned at the beginning of this presentation about your trip to China, and you get into the labs, and I assume you were sniffing around what else were they producing. Did you find anything that now has proven to be part of another different drug?
One thing that's very popular is called synthetic marijuana, K2 and spice. Has anyone heard of these drugs? It's called synthetic marijuana, but it's very different than regular marijuana. This is not a plant. You know, this is made in a lab, and it's much, much stronger. You know, this was legal in the United States until recently. You could buy this at gas stations, and it's basically a chemical that's sprayed onto plants. You can smoke it, but it makes people like go crazy in a lot of cases.
Rafael,
Hi Ben, welcome to Mexico City. So, what is your opinion about the contrast, about the legal topics, about the pharmacy topics in this context about the drugs in Mexico City on all country? What is your opinion about this contrast?
About the opinion about the what?
Legal topic and pharmacy topic with the drugs in Mexico.
Sorry.
Productions about the general topic in Mexico with the drugs.
With regards to pharmacies and dispensing opioids?
Yes, these contracts about the legal and pharmacies productions with the drugs.
Oh, okay. Well, so the problem in the U.S. was different than the problem in Mexico and the problem around the world. Like in the U.S. we had too many opioids, but other places, like you were saying, in Mexico, there's not enough opioids. So opioids are a very important pain medication for people who are suffering. You know, people who have cancer, people who have chronic pain, all these things. And too often they don't get to the people who need it. And so also, if you're in the U.S. now we've been cutting back. We say doctors can't prescribe opioids. So the problem with that is people who are addicted to their pills, like I said, they go to heroin, they go to fentanyl. And there's the same thing is happening in Mexico when people can't receive the proper pharmaceutical pills that they need for their pain. They're going to go find that on the street. And so it's a very careful balancing act, and it's not easy to do, but it's important that people have the medicine that they need.
Thanks.
¿Alguien más? ¿Alguien más? Por favor.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Professor Denton from National University of Mexico and Ibero-Americana University. First of all, I would like to say that I don't share your thoughts, no, with all due respect. And I would like to ask you first, have you ever used or abused drugs? Why I'm asking you this with all due respect, no, in your life?
Yes, I've used drugs, not fentanyl.
And why I'm asking this, because American society has a very, very big problem with drugs, no? If I turn on the TV, I always watch TV programs about drugs, no, using people drugs, no. And I don't share your narrative because you pointed to China that maybe you show us that the China is the problem, no? And you start your comments, no? Your narrative. I think that the big roots of this problem is the way of life of American, no? Of American people, no? I would like to ask you, how can you handle this problem if you don't use all the tools in terms of education that you know that American society has, no? That's my point of view. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course, as we mentioned yesterday, this event is exactly for that, to debate, to exchange viewpoints, and to don't take it personally, everybody. So, Ben, thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. Yes, I think first of all, I don't want to say that I'm blaming China. You know, like I said, the drugs will always find a way. If China's not making it, someone else will make it. India is already starting to make fentanyl and these drugs. It is most important to do the problem at home, address the problem at home with drug users in the United States. I do believe, though, that not all drugs are the same, right? I mean, everything is a drug. Caffeine, coffee is a drug, chocolate is a drug. You know, these are all psychoactive substances in their own. Cigarettes, you know, alcohol. Like, alcohol and cigarettes are the biggest problem in terms of death, right? Alcohol and cigarettes kill more people than opioids or methamphetamines or anything like that. We have to decide as a society, you know, what we're going to tolerate, what we're going to allow. And I think particularly when it comes to drugs like psychedelics, you know, LSD, psilocybin, there are certain drugs that have a lot of potential to help with PTSD, with diseases, you know, with helping people heal. Methamphetamine, fentanyl, heroin. These are problems that are not helpful in society, and we need to help people not get on these drugs in the first place, and we need to help them beat their addictions if they are on them. But I think when it comes to marijuana, you know, almost all Americans now support the legalization of marijuana. Marijuana has lots of problems, you know. It can cause young people especially, their brains don't develop right. People driving while stoned can be more car accidents. There's a lot of problems, but it's easy to make the case that, say, marijuana is better than alcohol. You know, less problems with alcohol. So, you know, I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do think that we need to look at each drug in particular and address it for what it is.
Thank you, Ben. We still have 10 minutes for questions. I think the main point here is to deal with a huge problem that is causing a number of deaths, and it's part of the drug trafficking worldwide. The question for us that makes important the topic of fentanyl is that Mexico is part of this traffic between China and the US to bring the fentanyl to the consumers in America, probably without knowing that they are going to consume the fentanyl, but the numbers are there, and the traffickers are gaining a lot of money doing that. So, Nadia, about one question, and I have one more for myself.
Gracias, buen día. Bueno, yo soy colombiana, entonces entiendo bastante que muchas de las políticas en cuanto a manejo o reducción de drogas que circulan por Colombia, salen de Colombia o ya hacen tránsito en México y llegan a los Estados Unidos, las orientan netamente a un sector informado. ¿Me explico? O sea, nosotros sabemos de la política existente y sabemos cómo se desarrolla, pero mi pregunta va a cuál sería un mecanismo idóneo para llegar a esos sectores que no tienen ese acceso a la información y que hacen parte de ese puente, ¿no? Porque la cadena productiva en Colombia es impresionante y la sustitución de cultivos no funcionó, la erradicación manual no funcionó, la erradicación con glifosato tampoco funcionó, y pese a que se impulsó como una política antidrogas impresionante en los últimos 20 años, ha sido un fracaso. Entonces, ¿cuáles serían unas herramientas idóneas para que este alcance y que la política antidrogas vaya más allá de ser eso, una mera política en papel, que en papel funciona, pero en la práctica no ha dado resultados?
I did catch that you're Colombian, so I got that much.
She was saying that she knows part of the policies that governments implement against the problem of drug trafficking are not necessarily effective when it comes to implementation and combat the production of drugs. And si entendí muy bien, your question is what are the good tools to put in practice to tackle down this problem within the government policies or beyond the government policies as a society?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something I think is very overlooked in this conversation, especially in the United States. We say, all these people are dying, you know, we have to stop the Mexican cartels, the Colombian cartels. But something that's really missing from this conversation is all the people who are dying because of the drug trade in Mexico, in Colombia. You know, something like 30,000 murders per year in Mexico. And so people who talk about legalization of these drugs, that's a very strong point in their argument. They say, if we legalize these drugs, we would put the cartels out of business, right? And so that would be a dramatic reduction in the number of deaths related to cartel violence. And I think that's something that's a very important point. It's very hard for me to say something like we should legalize fentanyl, because the thought of my children going to the pharmacy and buying fentanyl is not something I can handle. But if we can, you know, we need to consider the toll on the ground. You know, we have so many decades of the United States flying planes over coca fields, spraying them. Have you ever heard of Roundup? Made by Monsanto from St. Louis, wherever we're from. They spray Roundup on these fields to kill them. They send people on the ground to capture drug lords. It's all just added up to lots of money, destabilization, you know, and it doesn't seem to stop the supply of drugs at all. So I think it's very important to reconsider why we're doing this, what we're doing. So yeah, so if you have another question, then I want to have my giveaway for the book.
Yeah,
I have
we'll do the
question.
Sort of ballot or what is your question?
Okay, so
let me ask you something before the final question. After the impact of this book, what are your next projects dealing with the fentanyl or the continue raising awareness of the effect of the drugs on society? Do you have any particular project?
Well, I've been going around the country and now to Mexico too, speaking about this problem to educators, to people in treatment, you know, users, even dealers, to try to spread awareness and try to understand myself the way out of this problem. I'm starting to work on a documentary about a treatment drug called naltrexone, that it's an opioid blocker. It might be able to help a lot of people. So right now I'm still learning, you know. I don't pretend to have all the answers, and that's what I'm engaged in right now.
Thank you. Now your question for.
Okay, so this is whoever can answer this question can win this copy of the Spanish version of my book. So the question is, who's going to win the World Series this year? The baseball World Series. What's up? No, wrong answer. Anyone? Let's see. I had another question. You think where are you from? Where am I from?
Did anybody make his own research? A red girl.
Okay, let me
eyes all over San Luis.
All right, you won. Congratulations. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ben, again for coming to Mexico, to the Institute. We are the Diplomatic Academy of Mexico. We train the diplomats. But we also organize these events every year to exchange what is new on publications related to international affairs, drugs, and other topics that we have discussed, like illicit traffic of arms, China, Russia, geopolitics. So thank you very much for coming to the Institute. We are glad that you finally made it, and we hope that you spend a good time here in Mexico. Today start the playoffs in the major national. Now it's baseball. So thank you, and we will try, if you are around tomorrow, the book fair, to connect you with one of the journalists that is more involved and actively promote these topics on national television, Leonardo Pulso. So let's talk about it later. But for now, it's all. So thank you very much. Nos vemos a la 1. Vamos a presentar Don't Go Anywhere. No, you have to watch baseball. The Mexican Dream. It's the opposite thesis on migration, and it's related to the about 2 million Americans living in Mexico and the contribution of that community to the Mexican society all over our country. So, 1 o'clock we will start.